Okay. So, our conversation this morning was kind of centered around selfishness and how it's a silent marriage killer. And I think was the term that was used. And so we were just kind of talking about that, and I was more so just talking about it from a personal standpoint because I think maybe within the last week or two it had come up about selfishness. And my husband has mentioned it several times how in the beginning of our marriage how he told me that I was selfish. And the odd part was that I couldn't see it. And so when we started the conversation this morning, his question to me, and I think we were really kind of talking about how it affects marriage, but also people who want to get married. And I think his question to me was, pretty much, like, so what did you do, personally to combat that, to change that behavior? And so that's kind of what we were talking about. And so one of the things, and I'm gonna just kind of go down the line and share, some of the things I went on and typed it up. First of all, you have to purposely deny yourself and intentionally think of others, but that's something that has to be done at the same time. And of course, again, I'm talking, just about what I did and how I saw it play out, and me just kind of looking back on it. This mindset of being able to deprive yourself of always treating yourself to something nice in life, or giving yourself something extra. Because when you're talking about selfishness, self-focused, self-centered, you're always thinking about what's pleasing to your own flesh, in other words. And so just kind of talking about that, how it really takes you living life in the simplest ways, denying your flesh. If you're gonna have a different type of mindset, and I think that's when the question came about. So, like, specifically, what did you do? And even to this day, I try to practice that all the time, knowing that, to me, that's kind of like pride, that selfishness. If it was ever there, then there's a chance for it to creep up on you and be there. And so, of course, thinking of how you can be a blessing to someone else. However, it doesn't count towards your own spiritual growth if you do it grudgingly or with a bad attitude or with the wrong motive. And I think that's something very, very important to think about. You can do something for somebody and you can have a mind to do it, but if your motivation for doing it is that you found one little way that you're going to benefit from it, then that's not going to help you grow spiritually, because you're still getting something out of it to please your own flesh. And so I had told my husband, I said, in the beginning, when you told me I was selfish, what I did, and then I corrected myself. And I kind of laughed. I said, no, it's not when you told me I was selfish. It was when I accepted that I was selfish. When I accepted it, then I had a mind to change and do something about it, because, of course, the word selfishness has a negative connotation to it anyway. And it's kind of like what was said in the last message. If you don't think you're wrong, then you have no motivation to change. So as long as I didn't see myself as selfish, then I wasn't trying to look for selfish actions and or selfish mindsets or anything like that. So I wouldn't have changed.
So I want to kind of let you all know how this really came about. We were talking about submission, and what is it that causes a woman not to want to submit? Like what? Why is it? What is at the core of a woman not wanting to submit? And so then we kept talking, and then selfish came up. Like we live in a generation, like I said before, you heard me say before, there are women in the world that know how to submit. You don't have to be saved to submit. And so then what is it? Why is it that some worldly women can beat Christian women out in that particular category? And so then selfish came up, selfishness. Like, so what is, how does that play into that? Well, because if you're selfish, we live in a generation now where, again, like what my wife was just saying, if the woman ain't getting something out of it, then to her it's a sacrifice. I don't want to sacrifice. I need to know that I'm getting something out of the deal. So if I do something for you, then I want to know that you're doing something for me. If that make any sense. Like, and of course that, like what was said before, that's a silent marriage killer. It'll kill a marriage when there's selfishness involved. Because in other words, now you're only doing what you're doing because of what you're going to get out of it. Eventually, somebody's going to catch on to what's going on, and then people going to go their separate ways. And so you could have a person that's not selfish, and they're married to a selfish person. Pretty soon, they're going to wear the unselfish person out. Because really, when somebody's selfish, they're not helping to tote the marriage. They're not helping at all. It's all, and so from there you have to see your motives are wrong in everything that you do, because everything that you do get filtered through what is in it for me. What's in it for me? So then you have to ask yourself, so what kind of marriage do you have if something's got to be in it for you to do something? Why can't you just do something out of the pureness of your heart? Especially if you're married to the person. We're not talking about dating, but you think about that. So what is it that would even keep a woman from getting married today? It's the selfishness. It don't take long for a man to look at a woman and tell you're selfish. Now, and men will walk away from that, if that makes any sense. Some of you, you're able to fool a man just long enough to get him, but then some of you can't. Your selfishness is so, it beats you to the man. Your selfishness is there before you get there, if that makes any sense. And I remember one time when my wife and I, before we got married, we were on the phone. I like talking on the phone with her, and she did too at one time, I imagine. And so I remember one day we were talking on the phone, and she was about to do something, and she said, "I need to get off the phone." And I said, so you can't talk on the phone and do what you're about to do?" And she said, and she went off. I don't know if you remember that day. She went off. Now I'm gonna tell you, sisters. Now, this is what worked against her. I was talking to a woman. We weren't a couple, but I was talking to a woman before I met my wife. And we would be on the phone, me and this woman, we would be on the phone, we'd be on the phone. And the woman would say, well, I need to I'm about to run to the store. And I would say, oh, okay, so you need to get off the phone? She said, no, I can drive and talk at the same time. So she set a tone. She set a standard that it is possible. But so that day, now fast forward, maybe a couple of years later, that day, I'm talking a few years later, that day I'm talking to my wife, and she make the mistake of saying that, what she said. She went off. And I said, okay, okay, okay. We'll get off the phone. It ain't, you ain't got to fuss about it. And so every night before we went to bed, we would pray. When we were still dating, we'd call each other and pray. And so the time, we had a specific time set for that. And so I called her, or either no, she called me. But I knew, I said, this can't go on. This can't, because when somebody's really into you, they don't want to get off the phone with you. Yeah. Now I did have that kind of sense. I did know that. And so I said, she called me back. I knew, now I knew this. I didn't want to be in a relationship where I got to wait on her to call because she busy. Does everybody understand what I mean? No, we're not going to even start it off like that. Well, I go be with somebody else before I'm sitting at the phone waiting on you to call, because you setting the tone and you setting the rules for when you're available. See, no, I'm not. No, we're not gonna play that game. And so again, because somebody else, and not just one person, but other people had set a tone of, I can do this and that. Basically let me know what being interested looked like. Does everybody understand? And so that night, we got on the phone. I'm sure she called, and because I just determined, well, you know what, we ain't got to ever talk on the phone, you know. So she called and she said, okay, it's time for us to pray. I said, okay, so it's your turn to pray tonight. And she said, just wait a minute. She got quiet for a little bit, and then I hear all this crying. She cried and cried and cried, and finally I said, so what are you crying about? And she said, I was wrong for doing that. I was wrong. Forgive me. And so I said, okay. But and that lightened the load off of me because I had honestly determined in my mind this ain't gonna last. You know, if because you're not gonna dictate to me. I know what it looks like when somebody's interested. Now here's the unfortunate thing. You can be interested in a man, but your selfishness will appear like you're not, if that makes any sense. And that's what. So it made me notice. Okay, so she is interested. I'm gonna say this since it's come to my mind, and I'm gonna give my wife the mic back. She told me that in so many words that the dating that she had did before I came along, she was dictating, she was controlling when she could be seen. If that make any sense, she was controlling. I can't remember exactly how you said it, but it was this idea of I'm not gonna let nobody take up too much of my time. If that make any sense. And it was like if a man called her that was interested in her, and even if she was interested in him, he might say, so where did you go today? And she would feel like the man was violating her. Like, why are you asking me where I was? And so I thought, yeah, what world am I living in? But that was her mindset. Like, who are you? Why are you asking me where I've been? So so the Lord have done our work, and so I just wanted to give you a background of where this is coming from. The selfishness. This is the reason why it's so uncomfortable for women to submit, because if you're naturally selfish, you don't see. So what benefit? How does it benefit me to submit? Basically, is what it'll boil down to. What am I getting out of the deal? And that in and of itself is enough to kill a marriage. If you get married, if that make any sense. All right.
Yeah. That kind of goes along with one of the things that we talked about before about how people train you, and that's where that mindset came from. I was trained in certain situations to be that way, and it became my norm, which is also why it's important when you know something is not normal to not accept it as normal. Can you imagine how miserable we would have been if you had tried to accept that, rather than just making it known, that, there's something wrong with that.
So you want to go into detail about how you, well, not detail, but just share what you mean when you say you were trained.
Oh, with dealing with certain people in my past, I it's just pretty much, when a man, you're dealing with a man and he's not available all the time, you get accustomed to that. And so then that becomes your mindset. And it can be along the lines of anything. In that particular instance, it was availability. But, you can be with a man you get accustomed to him buying you flowers 3 days a week. And then that becomes your norm. And then you kind of expect that. Or you can get accustomed to a man, cussing you out all the time, and you accept it, and that becomes your norm. So for me, it was the spending time and being away from, really just living two different lives is really what I learned to do, you know previously. And that's the way it was showing up. And so it's like, you have to be kind of brought back to ground zero to know what is actually normal again, because there was a time when I wasn't like that, but I moved away from that because somebody else set a new normal for me.
She had been conditioned. The word is conditioned.
Yes, yes. That's exactly it. So, So I think one of the last things that I shared is, kind of like being able to identify that you actually are selfish. One of the things I was telling my husband was that when he first would tell me that I was selfish, I didn't understand it, and my reasoning was, like, I'll give to people. I give all the time. I don't mind sharing. I don't mind giving things. Like, so I did not understand. When he was talking about me being selfish, I couldn't see it because I reason those things in my mind. If I'm willing to give and I don't mind sharing. But what I didn't realize was that even when it came to all those things, I was still thinking of myself first. And that's one of the things that was so subtle in it. So you can have a person who just don't like to give, and that selfishness is more obvious. But what about when you are willing to give, you are willing to share, you're willing to share your time, you're willing to do things, but you're still thinking of yourself first? And an example of that is what I put, like thinking of, how does this impact me? How does this impact my time? How does this impact my money? How does this impact my ability to treat myself? Or how much does this inconvenience me? So when you have to think about all of these things first before you decide, how much you're going to give to somebody, then there's the selfishness, in it that shows up. And that's the way it was showing up, with me, with, in different scenarios. And so there were no, there were four examples, that I gave him that I'm just going to share about what I saw and what I had to do differently, so that, I wouldn't just continue to be selfish. And the first one, like, so in marriage, oftentimes, I might think to I'm gonna just use getting a snack, or maybe getting something at the store, or, something like that. I might, think of something that I want. And I would question whether or not, I thought of my husband first, or even thought of him at all. That was something that I would have to look at. And so sometimes, I will catch, like, man, I was just thinking about myself. I was thinking about what I wanted in this situation. And then I would have to purposely put my own personal desire on the background, and think, like, okay, well, what would my husband want? Or let me ask him what he wants. And so I had to retrain myself with my actions and with my mindset. But the first thing I had to do was challenge my mindset. I couldn't even do this thing where I think of something I want and then think of him and then say, oh, well, at least I thought of him, you know. And I think about, the scripture that talks about us preferring others, and esteeming others better than ourselves, or more than ourselves, and thinking of others. And when you're talking about being a blessing to somebody, being selfish and thinking of yourself can obviously get in the way. And so when I saw that playing out, in our marriage, it's like, it was a hard pill to swallow. Like, man, this is what he's been telling me all this time, you know, and what you can't mistaken, and don't be deceived into thinking that just because you can't see something about yourself, that your spouse can't see it, or that somebody else can't see it. It shows up. If you have it in you, it's going to show up in different areas. And marriages, because you're close to your spouse and you're living with them, it's easy for it to show up there, more than anywhere else. So another example that I shared with him was when I worked at the law school in Nashville. I went through this period where all of my focus was on how, I felt like I was being mistreated, or, purposely being frustrated, by one of my old coworkers, and how, she was just making life in the office miserable, and all the focus was on me and how frustrated I was. And so that didn't make for a very good atmosphere. I'm sure some of my responses and my bad attitude, she was probably complaining about the same thing, you know. But one of the things I had to do was I had to shift that, and I think it kind of came from the scripture. I think in Matthew 5, one of the, what we call the Beatitudes about how you treat people when you think they're mistreating you, what you're supposed to do, in terms of praying and doing good to them. And so one of the things that I did was I started to purposely go out of my way to try to help lighten her load with work. I would buy breakfast sometime if I was picking up breakfast for myself. I would buy her some, or just offer to do things. I created a more pleasant atmosphere between us, and then without realizing it, the same way like what my husband was talking about earlier about if a wife in the home has a bad attitude, it sets the atmosphere for that home, and you can feel that when you go. And so it's the same way it was in that office, because we were in the office setting an atmosphere. And so other people had to deal with that, and I wasn't thinking about, so that's the selfishness of it. I'm only thinking about me and how I think I'm being affected and what all I have to go through, but when I took the focus and emphasis off of myself, not only did it create a better relationship between us, but for the whole atmosphere of the office and everybody else in the office and everybody who visited the office, were affected by that.
So did you share what you had done? What you were doing? How did you take the focus off?
Oh, I was saying that I would buy things, buy breakfast sometimes, just go out of my way to just voluntarily help to do extra work, just to lighten up her load, to change the atmosphere between us. Sometimes, I would buy gifts if it was just something a person like, or maybe they're running out of something, and you think of it, just doing things like that. Really, I really went out of my way to change the atmosphere. I didn't just wait until a birthday came or whatever, staff appreciation week or something like that. So the idea is that you're actively doing something to change the way you typically were thinking and acting in a situation. So when you're talking about being selfish, and I can't stress it enough, the idea is that you take the emphasis off of yourself, you deny your flesh, and you put somebody else on the forefront. And in marriage, that's going to be your husband, because you're going to always have the opportunity there. I could say, okay, well, yeah, every time we meet for fellowship, then I'm going to be extra nice to so and so, but what about when you're living with somebody and you're around them every day? You have plenty of opportunities to really crucify your flesh and really think of how you can truly be a blessing to somebody else. Like my husband and I were talking about it, and I think he used the example about how sometimes he'll ask me to get up and grab something for him or do something for him, and I'm comfortable already. But it makes the difference if I get up with an attitude and I sigh real loud, or I make it known I'm tired and I'm already comfortable, versus me just getting up to do it, without all the extra. It makes a difference. And so, though, that those are the types of things. Even, and I'm gonna just say this, even with fellowship, and I think we kind of talked about it with food before. I think my husband mentioned it maybe about a week or so ago about how he kind of just, okay, I'm gonna accept whatever you cook and place before me. I don't want to get out of this being too choosy. Not that he won't ever get specifically what he want or ask for it, or not that I won't ask, but the idea is to get out of this mindset of just always catering to your flesh. And that's one of the things I was sharing about. I want to say the drinks, because that was kind of my mindset with the drinks. I told my husband, I said, I will look, and sometimes, I look on the counter. One of the things I don't like being wasteful in anything. I don't like being wasteful with food or anything, any resources that the Lord gives us. I don't like being wasteful with it. And so there were times, like we have fellowship and there might be like 6, 7, 8 different drinks, and just a little bit out of each one. And I'm like, okay, surely we can do something different. Some of these drinks can just be saved for the next time. And then I was just kind of thinking, like, where's this coming from? And, I just thought, it's not going to hurt us to, we have water, tea, some apple juice or something like that, and it doesn't hurt to minimize what your personal taste is. And I was just thinking, like, if we eat 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, that's 21 meals. And I'm telling you, we have to check ourselves if we can't forego one drink from 1, 2, 3 meals, our personal preference. They're like we're spoiling ourselves too much. You understand what I'm saying? We all drink water. But that's just an example of the way I personally changed and adjust my thinking that, okay, well, maybe I don't, this may not be my drink preference, but I don't have to pout about it. You understand what I'm saying? I don't have to, because if it will be a never ending journey if you get on that road and stay on there. It's kind of, like that statement that my husband said, the Lord spoke to him, the spirit of this world is never satisfied. And I tell you, ever since I heard him say that, it, almost like scared me straight. Like, okay, I want to make sure I don't have some insatiable appetite towards, you know, pleasing my flesh, basically, in whatever form that might come in. And so, that's just one of those things that, we can do, stop and just kind of stop and take a look at, what the mindset is that we have in certain situations. And so this is another one situation that I shared this before, but I think it was from a different standpoint. But one of them I told him about, was like in motherhood with me. Of course, we were talking about blended families tonight, so that's been a big thing. I always reflect on where we started, and if there's just anything that I could have done differently and needs to do differently going forward. Just to keep us a family, basically. And so I was telling him, in motherhood, I was trying so hard to make my non biological children see me as a loving mother, which put emphasis on me, if that makes sense. I was just more concerned about a reputation, basically, and how they viewed me instead of putting the emphasis on what they needed in the beginning, which was wisdom to help them transition into a new life. And I tell you, sometimes, I've thought about that, and I was like, man, I could have taken the time to learn a little bit more background information, learn what all played into just life before I came along. Just take an inventory of things like that. And I said, I was telling him, like, just taking the time from the very beginning to figure out what they really needed to transition into a new life versus, and mostly focusing on their needs, and it would have automatically translated into love to them, if that makes sense. I was so busy in my mind, like, okay, I want them to know that they're not being treated differently. I want them to know that I love them. I want them to know that I accept them. But all I really had to do is just like, in the situation of going into a marriage, you show interest, and it translates into love. Oh, I know you love me because you're interested in me, type of thing. But I was trying too hard in the wrong area, because I was too concerned about developing a motherly reputation. So with that, I had to switch the focus from my reputation to their needs, and in doing what I was able to do, just being able to consider all the factors that were now affecting our family, from past and present. So, just I guess kind of my lesson in all of that was, well, not necessarily a lesson, but kind of a reminder that, when you're too focused on yourself, you can't help anybody else. So as long as my focus was on building that motherly reputation, then I was missing the greater piece to the puzzle, which was really just taking the time to get to know our new situation, to know how to know how to really help. helping the situation. Because I will readily admit that I was very, very excited about, our marriage, the blended family. Like, of course, I had told my husband, before, like, from the time I was a child, I always knew I wanted at least 8 children. And so I was super excited about it, but it was an immature, naive way to enter the situation because it was kind of like, oh, well, I accept this, so everybody, let's just all accept it the same. But obviously, again, you have to think about all the factors of the situation and consider past things that have happened that are playing into it and present day things, and really figure out what's gonna be the best way to help the situation come together as one. Like what my husband mentioned on the broadcast, the actual wedding ceremony was, that was just one piece of it. Like it was a great, great thing. Like everybody writing their vows and actually, speaking their vows about, their vow to the family. But, after that, you have to live every day and things change and things happen and, you have to deal with situations and things like that. And so, the most important thing, and I did get to that point, but I think I wish I had the mind to start off that way, not trying to prove the whole evil step parent doesn't exist kind of thing, but just, deal with the family unit as it is. So that was the selfishness in that, how I kind of had to focus on myself at first, and how that just wouldn't have worked out, and I wouldn't have been able to be a mother. I would not have been able to bring anything to the table had I continued to focus on myself in that, in that particular manner. And so the last example that I wanted to share, which, I was telling my husband, I said, it's not something that I've necessarily dealt with. I don't doubt that I've had a mind or convicted about some kind of conviction about it at some point, but I couldn't think of a situation, but it's something that I still really, really am watchful of because it's a very subtle way that selfishness can come in. And it's, I was telling my husband sometimes whenever he may shop or, purchase something or whatever, a lot of times I'll do shopping and I'll put stuff in the cart and it may sit there for months. Because it's something I know I want, but I may want to keep looking for something else, or maybe I'm trying to decide, do I really want this? And if I go back in 2 months and I still want it, I may, get it. But if he's purchasing something and I suddenly remember my desire to have something, I start checking myself immediately. Is this desire surfacing right now because he's buying something and I'm having this mindset of where you're spending money so I can spend money. You're buying something, so why can't I? And that is a wrong mindset to have because number one, it kind of promotes competition. It promotes this idea that you're on the same level. And then you get to thinking about yourself and you'll be trying to outdo your spouse and thinking about, I guess, kind of putting the focus on you. It can kind of foster this mindset of, oh, where, well, you're thinking about yourself and you're buying for yourself, so let me look out for me. And so that's one of those things that whenever there's some kind of purchasing going on, no matter how big or small, I'm always checking my motive for why, I want to. And it doesn't mean that I don't buy something whenever he's buying things, but I'm just always checking it because that's something that, that's not a mindset that I want to develop. So, basically, kind of like we started off in the conversation, the first thing I had to do was admit that I had selfishness and intentionally look for ways to do the opposite of what I had been doing already so that I could come out of that.
And the key word is intentional. You don't just wake up one morning and snap out of selfishness. You have to purpose in your heart, I'm going to do, and it has to be continual. I'm going to do things for people without expecting anything in return. even some self gratification because I'm doing something for people. That's how sneaky selfishness is. You can, a lot of people say, "Well, I'm a giving person." Well, you got your reward, just like what the Lord said. When you doing things to be seen, that's your reward. So it shows you that how sneaky selfishness is. And so when you think about, especially a relationship as sacred as marriage, you have a whole lot of opportunities for that to be exploited. That's the number one reason, one of the number one reasons why marriages don't work today. Because after a while, people get to the point where they just looking out for themselves. Well, you ain't looking after me, so I'm gonna do me. And then basically, when you get to that point, the marriage is over. The marriage is over. So selfishness. Listen, think about what happened when you were growing up. Your mom might tell you, "I want you to watch your little sister. I'm about to go to the store. I want you to watch your little sister." And if she tell you, "And I'll give you a quarter when I get back. I'm gonna buy you some candy when I get back." Right then, she's or he, if it's your father, they are training you that you can't just do something just because you're being told to do it. It's got to be something in it for you. So you don't bribe children to do stuff. You gonna do it. Did you eat? You like the food? Good. Okay, well, you gonna do it. Does everybody understand that? So you don't bribe children because that's not a good thing. Because they grow up thinking, okay, so what am I? So you mean to tell you want me to cook? So what do I get out of the deal? You see. So you don't do that. You don't bribe children into doing what they ought to do. Does everybody understand that? And so when you get to that place, I'm telling you, selfishness is the reason why this very thing we're talking about now, that's the reason why so many women today have a hard time submitting because they don't see the benefit in it. How about this? You get to grow old with the person you love. Is that benefit enough? Does everybody understand that? Yeah. So let's take heed to that. Purposely, purposely do things for others without all these calculations like what my wife had brought. Because I had no idea until I married my wife that there was a such thing as being selfish with your time. I had never in my life heard of that dysfunction. Because I thought people thought like me. This is God's time. I wasn't even saved. I didn't have to be saved to know that. So I didn't know that there was a such thing as people thinking, okay, so how long is this gonna take? What is it going to I didn't think people, I just thought if you love people, it didn't matter. You just going to do whatever. So I didn't know that the devil went that deep. I really didn't. I didn't know that. But, it's one of those things you think about it. If you go into a marriage with that kind of mindset, it ain't even just about marriage. You'll kill relationships. Just any relationship. After, so the Bible says, the Lord said that in the end times, in the last days, that the love of many would grow cold. And that's really what it is boiled down to. And one of the main ways we see that is through selfishness. Selfishness. What am I getting out of it? You think about it's so many that selfishness. It has so many tentacles to it. Like my wife is explaining about being a step parent to my children and how she wanted to prove she was going to be a good mother, but all the while ignoring the issues at hand. You see, and so that's what selfish. But see, that's the deception of it. You can be doing something good and still be selfish. That's the danger. So people sometimes they figure, well, if I'm doing something bad, then I need to check it. If it's something bad, I need to check it. But you can be doing good things and still be selfish. Think about this, what Paul said in the 13th chapter of 1 Corinthians. Though I give my body to be burned, if I have not love, what does it profit me? You know what he's saying? I can give my life for you. I could literally lay down my life for you. And if I'm not, and I could do it for a reason other than love. In other words, isn't that something now? So that's something for us to think about. Let's not Let's not be selfish. Let's work on that. When I say work, I mean that. Work on that. Purposely go out of your way not to be that way. That it don't just leave automatically. Mom and daddy should have taught us. But since they didn't, God is here teaching us today. You got to get out of that. Does everybody understand that? I'm telling you. Other than that, selfishness eventually leads to bitterness. Selfishness leads to isolation, and isolation leads to bitterness. Because after a while, selfish people turn that down, tilt that down some. After a while, selfish people come to this conclusion: nobody cares about me like I care about them. They eventually that'll come out of all of them's mouth because in their minds, I've done all of this stuff for people. Listen, if you're taking inventory of what you've done for people, that's your example that you're doing it for the wrong reason. It's selfish. Does everybody understand that? And so my prayer is that we understand that. You have anything else?
Just gonna briefly just say something about dealing with selfishness in children. And I know we've said it before, but I can't reiterate it enough. Have your children to serve you and to serve others, and acknowledge, when they're doing it with a good attitude, acknowledge that sometimes you don't have to throw a party for them because you don't want to train them to look for praise because they're doing something, but you do want to acknowledge it as a good characteristic that they should have, that they should be happy to help people. And again, they're in the house with you every day. So the best way to train them in that is to have them serving you all the time and doing things for you and others, you and your spouse, husband and wife, mom and dad, and just doing things so that they can get out of themselves. And one other thing, I think I don't know if I mentioned this before or not, how, or I might not have mentioned it from this standpoint. Teach your children not to put so much focus on themselves. It's really cute when they start talking and they surprise you with some of the words that they come up with and their understanding of things. But one of the things that I've noticed just with some, like the children that, some of your children that I'm around all the time, when they get something new, they want to express it and tell it, and that's fine to an extent, but you want to teach them not to put so much emphasis on themselves where they're not looking for praise because they have on a cute dress or whatever the case may be, So when they come talking to me about different things, and a lot of times it's going to be after a sermon. I went to the store and my dad bought me this, or my mom did this, or whatever, and I always turn their attention to the word. What did you hear Apostle Bolden say in the sermon today? And I get to asking them questions, let them fill in the blanks and things like that. So that's something else you want to train them not to put so much focus on themselves. Don't let them talk about themselves so much, so that they don't get into all this self-centeredness. So that was just something else I wanted to say about children.
And I tell you that if nothing else, that's gonna be a turnoff. Does everybody understand that? Yeah, that's your biggest turnoff. A man or a woman, they'll go on a first date with you. If all they hear about is you be lucky to get a second date. Does everybody understand that? So unfortunately, that's the society we live in. The the real world society, if that make any sense, where everything is about us as individuals, and that, of course, that's not God's will. Learn to get to know people. I mean, really, genuine. It should not. That should not be a second thought to you. There's some of you sisters, y'all call my wife and y'all have a whole conversation. Then y'all say, "Oh, so how you doing, Sister Bolden?" Like that's not a first thought. I be thinking that's the craziest thing in the world to me. That you asking about how somebody else is doing, like you have to, like the Holy Spirit have to come and punch you upside the head to say, "Hey, won't you ask about somebody? That's how they doing." Like that shouldn't be the case. Does everybody understand that? And so I tell you what, I learned through the school of hard knocks. I called my aunt one time, my daddy's last living sister. I called her and she wouldn't talk very much on the phone. And so then I called her daughter who was raised as my daddy's little sister. And I said, yeah, Aunt Minnie Lee, she don't hardly talk on the phone. And she said, yeah, she usually get going with the hey, how you doing? You know. And so she was teaching me, you have to learn to care about people. I was calling to get family history stuff. But she was teaching me you have to learn to care about how people are doing. At how they feeling. Do they even feel like talking? And things like that. And so all of that goes into that. You don't want to just assume, because sometimes people assume that, well, you gonna be there. You there. What else you got to do? You in the ministry, so you supposed to talk. You're supposed to listen to me when I call. Does everybody understand that? So you have to get out of that mindset. Start thinking about how other people are feeling. They might not be feeling well. Does everybody understand that? I don't know when the last time, people don't hardly ask me that. Brother Bolden, is there something I can pray with you about? Is there something And so things like that, which of course that don't bother me. But we ought to have a mindset that we all need prayer. Our life is bigger than us. Does everybody understand that? Life is bigger than us. And so, let's be caring about people. Let's be caring about people. I think about, my favorite wrestler was the Junkyard Dog. And after he died, I was reading all these notes that people were writing about him. And he was known, he would travel from city to city, from state to state, from country to country. And if he met you and sat down and talked with you, it might be years later, he was going to remember your name and call you out of the crowd. Let's think about that now. But you have to be paying attention to people to do that. That talk that made me know I got to step my game up. He could see you in the crowd and know your name, and he'd meet you backstage talk to you. Isn't that something now? But that was over and over again. That was one of the things that he was known for. He cared about people. That's what I liked about him. He cared about people. See, and so that when you care about people, when you genuinely care, you gonna want to know about it. And to me, recipes are not to be beating people. Does everybody understand that? Yeah, that ought not to be beating people. Does everybody understand what I mean when I say that? You know more about recipes and what to cook and how to cook than you do about individuals. Does everybody understand? Yeah, that's what I mean. Whatever your interest is in life, that ought not to be beating flesh and blood. Does everybody understand now? All right, you got anything else? All right, so we pray y'all take heed. Let's purposely care about people and remove the selfishness. Let's move ourselves out of the way, and that's where love comes from. See, that's how people know that they're loved. Does everybody understand that? I want to say this last thing again. When my brother was killed in 1979, I didn't know that he was my brother. Nobody had told me that he was my brother. I'm gonna put it that way. Nobody ever, because we didn't have the same mother. He would come by the house, but we didn't have the same mother. He called my daddy Big Daddy, but other people called my daddy Big Daddy. So I didn't, he wasn't calling him the same thing that I was calling him. So I never knew that he was my brother. How did I find out? Because a grown man was coming to my house and taking me places. That's how I knew. So he didn't tell me I'm your big brother. He treated me like I was his brother. And so that's how people know you have the love of God, when you have love one for another. Does everybody understand that? That's how they know that you're his disciples. And so let's work on that. Let's be disciples, because I'm telling you, this right here is the key to having a successful marriage and having successful relationships. Just genuinely caring about people without your own considering yourself, without considering how much it's going to cost you. Does everybody understand that? All right. So my prayer is that we'll get it and we'll do better from here on out. All right.